Hello, Garth.
Hello, Chris.
This is very nice, isn't it? Look at these chairs.
It is. This is very nice and quaint. A little. I don't know how to describe this. What would you?
I don't know. I like that it's got a valve here. That's very important.
Yes.
I guess we should probably talk about XCOM 2, which is the game that you're a senior producer on.
Yes.
Let's start with the fact that the console version is out this week, at the end of the week for Europe, and we felt that might have been inevitable. Like, obviously it wasn't for launch; it was just a PC exclusive.
Right.
Why did it take so long to get to consoles in the first place?
Yeah. Well, we really had to focus on the PC game core. I mean, as we said at the time, that was massively important for the project. It was a decision that we made as a team. We wanted to make the best game possible. Modding was extremely important to us, so we focused on up to the last hour and beyond when we looked at some of the patches we did. What do we need to do to get the PC game as optimal as possible? At that point, and once we saw the response and that the team did a very strong job of delivering, we talked to 2K and they supported us in saying, hey, we now want to help you guys get this ported to console. So we worked with some external developers, the Workshop, Blind Squirrel Games, who did an absolutely fantastic job. We worked with them over the past few months just to make sure that everything translated right, which is no easy task, let me tell you, to get that translation. They had a really tough challenge, and they did a really good job with it.
Fair enough. So you always sort of knew that you wanted to get to consoles. It's just the game you wanted to make didn't allow Firaxis themselves to do it at the time.
That's right. That's right. We it's one of those interesting things, you know. You sort of just say, why not do it all concurrently at once? I mean, there's a lot of franchises that do, but even if you bring in additional team members, even if you bring in additional people, you're not focused on what can we do to make the game as rich as possible? What can we do to make the best absolute possible game with respect to number of features, with respect to, you know, having your graphics team focused on just optimizing the graphics on the PC port and not layering in these other complexities that could potentially water down the value of the core game. So we really wanted to focus on that. And then, like I mentioned before, layering and modding, it made sense as well. That was going to be a massive pillar for XCOM 2, which didn't jive with a multi-platform release. Even with, you know, the Xbox stuff being tested with Fallout, it didn't jive overall. At that time, we didn't know what was going to happen. So that was the decision about why we stayed there.
It looks like the modding scene for XCOM 2 has been fantastic, even from day one. Partly because you guys had like the Long War team and like in before launch and had things prepped. But that modding scene did what you'd expect when you give them the right tools, I guess.
Totally.
It's a fantastic part of the game. Is that something that the console versions will ever get a taste of? We've seen games like Fallout try it.
I mean, it's something personally I would love to see. We don't have plans for that right now. I think there's a lot of unanswered questions. I think it takes a pretty big infrastructure to actually pull that off, even when you look at the legalities and curation and all that stuff. And that's a totally different environment through first party. So we'd love to see it work with other projects, and then who knows for the future. But right now, we don't have plans for that.
So I guess it's more of a platform issue. It's easier for you to put that in place on the PC with the Steam Workshop. It's
much easier.
Sort of in place.
Much easier. Yep.
Fair enough. So you've inevitably done the console version. The DLC that you kind of talked about pre-release is all out now. Is Firaxis done with XCOM 2? Do you still have plans?
We are not talking anything beyond the console right now. The team worked very hard on those DLCs. Did you get a chance to play any of them?
Yep, I've played both.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and Anarchy's Children as well, I guess.
Yes, that was more of a customization one, but the gameplay ones were Alien Hunters and Shen's Last Gift, which were pretty cool. They were sort of like micro features that could stand alone in another product, but we built a whole package around them. And we're really proud of that, but that's all we're talking about today.
Okay, fair enough. You look at the PC version though, obviously it had some issues at launch on a performance point of view. There's still a few lingering issues here and there. Is that still something you're looking at, or have you done as much as the team can?
We are. We take it extremely seriously. This franchise is our baby, and we are taking all the feedback from the community. We distill it down to, you know, what are things that are trending, what are things that we can pinpoint and safely fix. We've already released, I think, 6 or 7 patches, and we'll continue to do it as long as there are things to fix that we can identify and that are crystal clear with how to fix. We're going to continue supporting.
As the team needs to learn from that launch experience, just because it is a fantastic game, but it felt like there was we were distracted a little bit by some of the performance issues, which seemed a shame.
Yeah. I mean, to be completely honest, some of that surprised us with respect to some issues that certain people were having that we could not repro easily until we really diagnosed what was happening. We pushed them with what else was going on with their configuration. So there's certainly a learning experience to make sure that we can be better prepared for that, for sure.
Cool. One kind of small point, but I do need to ask it, otherwise a friend of mine, James, will be very upset. So you have a console version of XCOM 2. XCOM, Enemy Unknown, and Within both supported gamepad on the PC. Is that something we can see for XCOM 2? I'm an idiot, but from my point of view, it doesn't seem like it should be a huge leap. But I don't know how to make games, so is that something we might see?
We unfortunately are not talking about any of that today,
okay.
But yes, we shall see. We are going to continue to support the game.
All right, fair enough. Now that I've asked you all the questions that you can sort of answer to an extent, we'll get on to some of the interesting stuff.
Okay.
So XCOM 2, you get to look back and kind of assess it with a bit of distance now. It is a fantastic game, and one of the features I really, really like about it is that you added the timers into the game. It kind of, I remember saying at the time that it forces you to be a sort of more interesting player. You have to rush forwards. You can't just, make your blue move, overwatch the whole team, and move around as a group. You sort of need a bit more urgency. But there's a divide in the community about the timers. Some people think they're too strict. Some people really like them. Why was it such an important thing for you guys? Because it's not something you can toggle on and off. It is. It's a fundamental design decision.
That's right.
Why did the game need timers? What do you think about them now?
Yeah, sure. The timers are an inherent part to some of the secondary objectives and the systems involved with those. Like you touched on, and I'm glad you feel that way. I personally feel that way as well. I like how you put that, a more interesting player.
Yeah.
We should say that to the other side of the coin, become more interesting. But it's true. Like, I actually felt it when we were playtesting early in post-production, and we started having the framework laid of all the design systems. I immediately loved how I couldn't rest on my laurels from Enemy Unknown, which is a very comfortable thing to do, and I think in some ways it might have been expected. Like, of course I can play the way I played in Enemy Unknown. But I grew to love that there was something unexpected there. And XCOM 2 is all about things that are not expected. We want to throw wrenches in your plans. We want to make you, keep you on your toes a little bit. So I think it was important to offer something that felt different in a numbered sequel. This isn't sort of just an expansion pack or something that was post-release content for the base game.
Sure.
We wanted the whole world to feel different. And then when you think about the theme of the world, which is building a resistance, you're constantly against the gun, you're behind. We want that sense of pressure from a macro level of sort of being the underdog and constantly having the pressure with the Avatar project and all that stuff. It made sense to trickle it down in some cases to the combat level as well, where you're like, I have to get this done because I need these resources back on the strategy layer, so I have to get there in time. We did find, we actually, believe it or not, we had it more at one point.
Harsher time limits.
It was almost the entire game had it. So we felt we found this happy medium of whether you get a supply mission or one of the narrative missions like Black Site or Forge, retaliations don't have timers, things like that. That every 3.5, 4 missions, you get a mission that is not timed. So you sort of have that return to normalcy of what Enemy Unknown was. And to me, that felt like a really nice breather from the freshness of XCOM 2.
Despite them all being horrendous mission types that
That's
tend
true.
to punish you.
That's
but
true.
I know what you mean.
We had to make them difficult in another way. I mean, come on, we're not going to have a cakewalk mission in XCOM. But to have the timer not there all the time felt like just a nice reprieve from that new feeling.
Do you see that being a definitive part of your XCOM games now?
Oh no, I wouldn't say that. I mean, that's certainly a question that we're going to be talking a lot with design about as they sort of let it settle in. But I wouldn't say it's definitively a part. Just like we didn't have timers in the first game, the second one added them. Who knows if we're lucky enough to make XCOM 3? Who knows what the newness will be there? Sure,
that's one of the things I wanted to touch on actually. So the timers specifically, to me, are one of the standout features that you looked at how players approached Enemy Unknown and you sort of adapted to it.
Right. Right.
Is there anything that you've seen so far in XCOM 2 that you now want to tweak in a similar way?
That's a good question. Off the top of my head, no, nothing is massively jumping out at me with respect to, how can we F with the player in the next one because they're doing this so much.
I guess one of the things that you could touch on is that I feel like XCOM 2 makes you a very aggressive player. Like often when you discover a group of enemies, you need to try and wipe them out immediately.
Yeah.
Got less room to sort of exchange shots than perhaps in the past game. Is that the kind of thing you'd be looking at?
Yeah, I mean that for sure could be. I mean, you're touching on concealment and having to pop the first group that you see and take them down with an ambush, which is very fun. That's something we actually talked about earlier in development with, hey, how can we give the player the option to extend concealment as a squad? Like, let's say they want to try to sneak through the whole thing, and technically that's possible and feasible to try, but it's not a really good strategy. But that is an example of something that potentially design might evaluate and say, hey, how can we sort of tweak this formula and maybe have extended stealth as a squad, which you can do through certain modifiers and even individually with things on the class-based system, which is useful for certain mission types like anti-facilities.
Okay, this is something that you've just mentioned as part of the community Q&A that you've just had, and I felt you were maybe a little bit unwilling to say it in case you were saying too much. One? But I feel like I should get you on the record. You were talking about a missing feature that you sort of you liked the idea of with XCOM 2. Well, I was there and I heard it, so I think we're going to have to talk about it.
Well, look, I mean, we talked about on Enemy Unknown. We wanted to. We had a concept image that we actually shared. It was of a Reaper. It was a very large-scale alien, and it was something that got cut. I guess the equivalent of that for XCOM 2, we had a large-scale enemy prototype at one point, which is a vehicle.
Right.
We really loved the idea behind it, but it just didn't fit in mechanically with all the other multi-objective stuff going on. It became a bit too punishing when this thing would, plow into the map. And really to get it right too, we wanted to let it bake a little bit more.
Yeah, needed a bit more time.
Yeah,
was that the, so we saw like an Advent kind of troop carrier was in some of the early gameplay?
Yeah.
Was that it?
Yeah,
okay, excellent.
Yeah, you're talking about the ground-based one?
Yes, the ground-based one.
Yes, yep, you got it.
Right, cool. Yeah, I can imagine why that might be an interesting thing to make work within your systems.
Yes. I'm not going to get fired, am I? All right.
You're fine. You're
just
okay.
want to make sure. I'm joking.
One of the interesting things with how you start XCOM 2 is obviously that you basically, the setup is that the player lost in Enemy Unknown.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting way to reset the playing field. It means that you're not starting the game with all this advanced tech, and that you can have an XCOM narrative that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is that something you have to do every time now? Because
I know we've. So I feel like we've dipped into that well with this one, and it worked. It was unexpected.
Yeah.
I think the team really thought through everything to how that mechanically what is needed, and then how the narrative can support that. We can't talk about the future, but I feel like that is something you cannot dip into dip into again. So I'm sure the team and we'll come up with something really creative that's not, hey, you lost in XCOM 2 as well.
Yeah, I'm obviously not trying to get you to announce the next game here, but well, I mean, you can if you like. But at the end of XCOM 2, there is a suggestion that things are going to continue past that point in the storyline. Do you always see the XCOM universe that you're making being a kind of single universe that you dip into at different points in time? Yeah,
I mean, we don't know yet. We really love sort of, even though in some ways it's a bit of a split universe because we're saying you lost.
Yeah.
We do like the idea that this is sort of a linear progression of there was the story of the first invasion, and now you lost that one, and you have to sort of counter that and make things right on the planet. We haven't talked about that too much yet, whether it's a multiverse, whether it's split, whether it's linear, but we'll have to see. We'll have to see what the future holds.
All right, cool. I think I can leave it there then. Thank you so much, Garth.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cheers.